Welcome to The Michael Blum Show, where we talk about things you don't want to talk about. We talk about sex. We talk about politics. We talk spirituality and substance abuse. Join us by calling 800-699-0980. Think, speak, and be heard. Here now is Michael Blum. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Michael Blum Show. I hope everyone had a good week. I know I did. We're broadcasting tonight. It is the 2nd of October. What year is it? 2018. And it's a beautiful day here in Boca Raton, Florida. There's not a cloud in the ceiling here in the studio. We're looking pretty good here. I actually did some improvements here with the video, with the camera here, so you could actually see more of my beautiful face. You know, before I looked at it was teeny, like a teeny face, and a lot of background. So I switched that up. Anyway, you are listening to the Michael Blum Show. Our topic for the evening is going to be anger management. That's anger management. How do you go ahead and control yourself when you really feel you can't? Everyone's been there. Everyone knows about it. And we're going to have an expert on the phone with us. Hopefully, he will join us within 5-10 minutes. I always like to get the paperwork, as I call it, done, because nothing ever really seems to be complete until the paperwork is finished. My paperwork is basically, if you want to go ahead and listen to the show, the address for my show, shockingly enough, is michaelblumshow.com, MichaelBlum show.com. And if you go to that website, you will see that there's on the top, there's a couple of little menus you can have drop down, and one of them is like Listen Now. And when you go to Listen Now, you can go ahead and hear the stream from either our Facebook page, which I think is Facebook.com/Blum Show, or Twitter, which is @Michael Blum Show. A lot of Michael Blum Show. I think I've said my name more just now than I have in the last year, or at least since the last broadcast. I promised the guests that we would try not to get into politics too much, although it's kind of hard not to, given the anger that's present, as I see it, mostly on the Democratic side, but certainly on both sides. I mean, there are people that are pissed off and just angry. And we're going to talk about the good, the bad, and all that other kind of stuff dealing with anger. Hopefully that you'll join us. Now, this is a call-in show, so we do take calls as well as just do the guests. Make sure the calls are relevant to what we're talking about, though. I appreciate that. It's kind of weird when we're talking about anger management, someone calls up to talk about the problems they're having with the diabetes medication. Anyway, I am Dr. Michael Blum. I am a doctor of dentistry. I am not a psychologist or anything like that. I have multiple degrees in music and dentistry, obviously, if I'm a dentist, and, of course, education. I taught neurologically impaired and emotionally disturbed children for about 6 years, New York City school system, and I've done tons of other stuff relating to childhood development, and in particular teaching reading, which is kind of basically what you do if you're teaching emotionally disturbed and or physically handicapped, brain injured children. They have all different terminologies for them today because everything must be politically correct. I am not the most politically correct guy that you'd ever want to meet in your life, but I am out there, so feel free to join us. I've been yakking about this, but the call-in number tonight, as it is every single week, is 800-699-0980. That's 800-699-0980. We haven't had a call in a little while. Actually, last week I turned everything off. I didn't want any calls. Like I said, sometimes the calls we get are just not germane to the topic, but sometimes they are. Anyway, tonight, as I said, anger management is going to be where we're going to go. And we have with us, everyone gets involved with anger at some point in time. I mean, it could be you lashing out at a boss, slamming a fist in the wall. I've broken, not my hands, thank God. I'm a dentist. Who the hell needs them? But I have actually slammed my fist through walls. I have ripped doors off their hinges. I have done all sorts of crazy stuff, and it usually makes me feel good. But we have Dr. Golden is going to be coming on. Dr. Golden has been doing anger management therapy for a long, long, long time. He has a book out, Overcoming Destructive Anger. So obviously, if there's destructive anger, there must be constructive anger. And anyway, we're going to welcome Dr. Golden to the show right now. And here we go. Can you still hear me? I know I hate to sound like an AT&T commercial, but can you still hear me?
I can still hear you.
All right, and you're looking pretty good here in terms of, let me make sure we get enough volume on you. That's my only concern. All right, I'm going to pop you up a bit more here. All right, should be good. All right, very good. So anyway, Dr. Golden, what pisses you off?
Well, when I get angry, I know enough now that there are other feelings behind it. I'm feeling threatened in some way. I'm feeling threatened sometimes with time resources. I might feel threatened physically if someone cuts in front of me on the highway. Anger is about a threat.
All right, so basically, as I said, if you ever wrote a book and it's called Overcoming Destructive Anger, I assume then that means that there is constructive anger. Am I right?
Yeah, anger is a natural emotion, and it serves a purpose to let us know what's going on for us. If we take time to pause and reflect on our anger, anger can be used to motivate us to try to right what's wrong. People who get involved in politics or fundraising, they're channeling anger about different situations in a constructive way. Anger, if we take time to pause, we can learn to be assertive and express ourselves, our needs or desires more clearly. So we're not either passive or aggressive. So yeah, anger is a very useful and informative emotion.
Now, I've been called an angry person on more than one occasion. Just to get like I don't know if you heard a little bit of what I was talking about before, but I have smashed my hand through a wall. I have ripped doors off hinges. I have thrown things, and I was notorious when I was younger at property damage. If someone pissed me off or there was something that was not going on, I would never hurt somebody. I never went and attacked anybody ever. But I have no compunction breaking into your car, undoing your brakes, and pushing you into the creek because I may be pissed off or angry because you took my spot. So the odd thing, though, is that whenever I do these things, and they don't come frequently, they may be years and years apart. They could be 2, 3, 4, 5 years apart. But when they leash out, they're usually extremely severe. And I feel really good about them when it happens. I don't feel like upset. I don't have remorse and say, oh my gosh, well, look at what I did or anything like that. And as I'm sure a lot of the people you talk to, I feel I'm 100% justified and right. And is there any, how do you glean from that positivity?
In my perspective, my observation is that when our anger is intense and sometimes overly intense for the situation, it's usually we're not just angry about the current triggering event. That current triggering event is leading us to revisit past hurts, past wounds, past feelings of being taken advantage of, perhaps. So the over-intenseness of a reaction, like I say, it's a sign that it's not just the current triggering event. And in terms of feeling good about it afterwards, part of what happens is acting out the anger gives a temporary release from the tension we feel, an immediate release, I should say. So it works in the short term. And for most people in the long term, it doesn't work, whether we get in difficulties with relationships, with the law, or have physical altercations with people if we are expressing our anger in a destructive way.
So I'm still unsure in the situation that I described with me. Is any of that constructive at all, or is it always constructive at some level?
It's yeah, that what you described in many ways is destructive expressions of anger. So when you say someone took my spot, So much of anger is about the expectations we have about how things should be, how people should behave. We could focus on the person who is not following our blueprint about how things should be. I say we wake up in the morning and we all have a blueprint. Everyone has their own unique blueprint. And we wake up, and if in the morning our expectations are satisfied, we say, hey, that's a good morning. And by afternoon, our blueprint isn't being, in a sense, obeyed by our own expectations. We get frustrated. It's a natural tendency to want to gain control, to have things match our expectations. And yet, at some point, we get to realize that having expectations and being able to gently let go of them because they're unrealistic or destructive for us. Part of the destructive aspect of some of the things you cited is you might feel good. Physically, your cortisol is going up. Your cortisol is increasing. Hormones are flowing that make all the research for the last 30 years says that when we get angry routinely or have an ongoing hostility, we're more prone to cardiac problems, more prone to high blood pressure. So maybe it's a factor of my getting older. When I get angry, I'm much more concerned with wanting to calm my own body, and I take my attention away from the situation or the person that may have triggered or
Hmm.
contributed to it. It's more my wanting to control myself because if they're in my head with my anger, I say that I'm giving power away to them.
Well, in a way, I believe you are. You are certainly giving power away to them. Um, I'm curious if you feel, or if there's anything in the literature that would indicate that genetics has something to do with this. Because my grandfather was a rough guy that you really didn't want to deal with in a negative way. Yeah, I mean, he would have no problem slugging a cop, if he felt he was wronged or there was some justification. Usually his reason for doing that was because the cop was intimidating someone who was obviously Jewish. And
Mm.
although my grandfather was not a religious man, he was raised in the streets and he had a rough, rough life growing up. And he would just confront the cop and go, "What are you bothering him for?" Because he's Jewish. And the cop would say, "What the hell is it your business?" And the cop would be on the floor. And my grandfather would be in jail.
Mm.
So that was kind of how it happened. Now,
Hmm.
he passed away when I was young. I was a toddler. So I don't really have a vivid memory of him at all, just through pictures and all of that. But I feel like somehow maybe my genetics are tied to him in some way because I feel anger too. Is there anything that you know about that would talk about the genetics behind it, and if that's a real thing?
Uh, our anger or reactivity, in a sense, that's both nature and nurture. For example, if you have some infants in a nursery and you wave your hand in front of them, some infants kind of react to start with a startled expression. Others could kind of just watch your hand very gradually. So some infants are described as thin-skinned, and others are thick-skinned, less reactive. Increasingly, too, there's been some studies that there's genes or a combination of genes that, when triggered by experiences, they can make one become more prone to anger. Those are some studies that have been out there. In many ways, what you're describing too can be attributed to so the experience or the nurture aspect. So if your grandfather was that way, how did your father react? And if he reacted in certain ways, did you get some of that by modeling from him? You mentioned the word I feel justified. And all of anger, we have a key desire that's being threatened. And for some people have an intense desire for justice, that becomes the overriding desire that becomes some of the motivating power behind their anger. And any kind of not expressing the anger could be experienced as I'm being taken for granted, or I'm being disloyal to a parent who advocated justice and that sense of being treated with respect.
I see. Well, I think everyone wants to be treated with respect. Unfortunately, I don't think many people get that nowadays. I find people, particularly in the younger generations, to be more rude than my generation was. But that could be a generational thing too. That maybe I'm just full of crap, you know. And that's not the case. Maybe everyone is the same as it is. There really isn't any change. We're really not that important, and we're going to go ahead and let's say in 100 years, no one will know we were ever here, and that's that kind of it. But I do, as you said, I do feel justified when I get angry quite often. Because usually it's something that I've harbored for a long time. But it can get nasty. And you just alluded to something in terms of being an angry person. I have there's somebody who's one of my superior dentists. One of the owning partners right now in the practice I'm working with, and he is mean and nasty and vicious with people. Not so much the patients, obviously, but certainly with office staff and everything like that. And he's told me once, he says, well, that's how I get respect around here. And I was wondering how you felt about anger equaling respect.
A lot of people get respect out of fear. And for some people that works. And years ago, I saw someone, and this has happened a number of times, where they described a father, or they themselves expressed it, that, I like people to fear me. I feel in control, and I feel I can get respect that way. And so that's one way of getting it. On the other hand, compassion is another way of getting it.
Yeah.
Compassion with certainly guidelines and expectations. For example, if you're in the workplace, but compassion is another way. And the idea of getting fear being the motivator, I think I often see that has to do very much with how did I learn to govern myself or develop respect for others? How was I taught to respect others? What was the consequence if I didn't? We learn habits. Anger is a habit. We say it's part of who I am, perhaps, but it's a habit in how we think, how we feel, and our physical reactions. And so these are habits with ongoing proneness to anger, then becomes part of one's personality. But I have to admit, in my profession and personally, I see personality as fluid, able to change, versus being fixed and rigid.
So there's hope for me, huh? Well, maybe.
I say to everyone, in spite of how you're managing your anger now, we can learn new strategies.
Yeah, I thought you were just going to laugh and go, that would be it. It's weird because this particular doc that I'm talking about, who says that he gains respect that way, I got to tell you, once he's out of earshot of the rest of the office staff, he has no respect at all. I mean, there's just all sorts of stuff that's being said and talked about, and it's like, it's almost like it's creating a gossip pipeline,
It's not real respect. It's out of fear. You're right. And people eventually gravitate away. They want to move away from someone like that. So it's not a lasting, sustaining way of getting ongoing respect.
No, it ends pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Other thing I'm concerned, I'm just interested in actually, is that I have been told from time to time, why don't just hold it in? Just hold your anger in. You don't need to have to express it. It's unhealthy to do so. Like you said, it hurts your body. It does all sorts of nasty stuff. And so it's really not necessary for you to express any of that. Just hold it in, and everything will be fine. And then on the flip side, like when I was doing a little bit of research for the show today, I hear the opposite. Well, no, it's not really good to hold it in. So I'm curious where you stand on that. What are your thoughts?
Well, in the 70s, their therapists used to encourage people, let it all hang out. If you have anger at someone, express it, do whatever you want. The whole priority is you and how you feel about it. Then some people say stifle it and hold it in, which isn't constructive either. So let me give an example, and people would have various reactions to how I describe it. But about half a year ago, I was in Trader Joe's, and I was walking down the aisle looking for my frozen broccoli.
Mm-hmm.
So I turn the aisle, and I'm walking down toward that case where the frozen broccoli is, and I see an elderly lady whose back is to me. She's leaning over her cart. I assumed, and I just assumed that she was looking at a shopping list, and I made a estimate. Do I have enough space to reach in to get my broccoli without even having to bother asking her to move? So I thought I did. I reached in, and when I turned around, she yelled at me in a loud voice in the middle of the aisle, "You hit me. You pushed me. I can get the police after you." Um, my practice of strategies that I teach, I practice them. And so literally in my mind, I lower my voice because that's the way to diffuse anger, hers and my own. Uh, and I said, "Ma'am, I don't believe I touched you." "Yes, you did. You hit me." So my next strategy was, and I have this in my mind, constructive or destructive? Meaning I take that moment to pause and ask myself if what I'm going to do is constructive or destructive. And so I said to her, "Ma'am, if I touched you, that was not my intention. I'm sorry." And I walked away. And she followed me for half of the aisle, and I went to the next one. Physically, I learned strategies not to become completely unreactive, uh, but in the next aisle, continually calm myself, physically get more relaxed. Because again, my anger is, I see it as constructive or destructive for me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not stifling it, it's just calming myself. Um, and I felt good about that.
Yeah, it's good to be able to control yourself. That's for certain. Um, how do you deal with people that say, and I'm part of this, when I and as I said, I don't, this doesn't happen to me that often rather, but when I do fly off the handle, it gets kind of nasty very, very quickly, and I can't help myself, and I'm going, once I start, I'm going until I'm done, and then when I'm done, that's it, you know. I mean,
Uh-huh.
last one was, there was, and again, like you said, it wasn't one thing, it was a set of things when I was planning my daughter's wedding a couple of years ago. And it was a set of things that were occurring from the other side of the family, where it was starting to be proven to me that the new husband was way more concerned with his family than he was with his wife to be. And in my marriage, the most important thing in my marriage is my wife and me. Well, you know, obviously we need to have both. But I'm on. I got her back 100%, and I felt he didn't. So I blew up in a restaurant. We were going to go out for a brunch, and I just blew out. And I was very, very to the point that if you don't, if you don't really care about your wife right now, tell me now, because this marriage is going to be screwed up. And I got really pissed. I had to get up, and my daughter met me outside, and shockingly enough to me, my son-in-law took it all. He didn't walk out. He didn't get pissed. But I walked back in, kind of like, it's a real release, like a real catharsis. It's a real release. I don't know if it's better than sex or not, but it was like, it was like a real release when I went back in, and I felt that I was, again, justified. And I needed to ask those questions. And I'm sorry they came out in the way they did, but that's the way they did because of my concern for my daughter. And like I said, surprisingly enough, my son-in-law doesn't really seem to care. We have a great relationship now. I know he does have my daughter's back, but I couldn't help myself. Is there a way you can help people who like go through that kind of a thing where they just absolutely feel I can't control myself?
Well, one of the things you're saying is you felt the release. And again, the release is that discharge of tension. The tension is about a threat. Sometimes it's to our physical well-being, our emotional well-being, to those we love. Sometimes it's to our resources, our energy, our time, our finances. And so that tension is experienced in your body from those feelings of threat, feelings of disappointment, feelings of frustration, perhaps. So a variety of negative feelings. Protecting your daughter, feeling threat for her. The expression of anger, again, releases that tension, and that's one way to do it. And fortunately for you, your son-in-law was able to go with that. On the other hand, I don't know if you've heard about a number of cities have had them that call anger rooms, where people go into a room with different objects, dishes, televisions, lamps, and they have a choice. You can bring a baseball bat, a golf club, whatever you want. You could videotape it. You can have them play certain music, and you could spend. I think the cost was $25 for 15 minutes, breaking everything. And people
sounds like fun.
Yeah, people walk out feeling, I got that off my chest. It releases the tension. They do feel calmer. There's no question about that. But it doesn't involve understanding their anger, learning new strategies to manage it, looking inside themselves for being more connected with, are my expectations realistic for the people in my life? I have a blueprint about how life should be. In reality, we can ask, we can plead, we can negotiate, or you can yell and scream at them. So for people who I see who say, I had no control, it's a matter of becoming more in touch with their bodies to recognize the tension in their body, to decide, for example, well, the example you give, do I want to? Do I want to change my habits? The idea of justice being as important as it is, maybe I don't. Maybe I do want to get along better with people. I can give up the way I express myself. In a sense, you have to, at some point, you don't have to, you get to decide the cost benefit.
Sure. Well, obviously, I don't think anyone really wants to be kind of fly off the, well, maybe some people do, but I don't want to be a fly off the handle kind of a guy and all of that. However, I do notice that sometimes if I make statements or say things, particularly if I'm doing talk or talk radio, that if there's a little smidgen of anger in there with it, it kind of drives the point home. And to me, I would kind of look at that as maybe that's an example of using anger positively. It's to kind of make your point abundantly clear.
I think that can be used constructively. I'll give you an example. I had a friend who he was very even keel. He worked in an advertising firm many years ago, and he supervised a number of people. But he would selectively express the anger, and then they knew, oh my goodness, he's really serious. So it's kind of an exclamation mark versus someone who is characteristically flying off the handle that people eventually, again, either respect out of fear or they just try not to associate with that person. But it can be used selectively. In the media, clearly we have had different views about anger over the years. We were very sensitive many years ago to see someone on TV express the slightest sign of anger. And now it's much more acceptable.
Yeah, it's like the movie Network. I don't know if you remember with Patty Chayefsky.
Right.
So that's kind of what that's now real life. It used to be fake. But
exactly. Right. We become immune to that.
Yeah, but we're becoming that very, very. I was going to say slowly, but I don't think slowly. I think rather quickly right now. I promised. I said we really won't get into any politics there, but obviously that's
right.
Politics, religion. There are a whole bunch of areas that just seem to be anger provoking. Now, I got to tell you, the thing that disturbs me the most is because when I watch a lot of the media right now, I don't think that they're practicing anger. I think they're practicing hate. and I can be angry at my child, which I have been. Talk about the anger thing. I thought my daughter, I thought when she was young, it was a half day at school, and I stopped. I came back from work. We picked her up, and she was belligerent to my wife. I don't even remember why or what she said, but I got so pissed. I screeched on the brakes. I spit in her face and threw her out of my car, and left her on the roadside. And then came home, and again, I didn't feel bad about it. Of course, I went back to get her. I wouldn't just leave her there, but I did have to go back. But at no point in time did I ever even imagine or say to myself, I hate my daughter. And I think that very often anger and hate are confused. So I was wondering if you can give us kind of like the difference between them, and how one, to me, obviously, I think hate is a later manifestation perhaps of anger, or it could be its own separate entity. I was just curious what you think.
I think hate is the extreme form of anger, where many times we are angry because we're global in our thinking. We jump to conclusions, and I say our intense reactions. For example, if I'm cut off on the highway, someone might say, that person did it. I take it personal. He's trying to get after me. Or that person is not respecting me. Without thinking, that person reminds me of all the different experiences I've had where I haven't been respected. And so the accumulation of anger escalates. And hate becomes so global, it festers in the sense of, it's a simple way of dealing with our complex feelings and complexity in life in general. We might give a label to a person, and I think, oh, I immediately know that person. I by their race, by their religion, by their ethnicity. And hate is a way of dealing with our own fears. Is a way also of giving up power. When we hate, we are giving up a sense of freedom, that we really do have a freedom to do many things, even face creating an identity for ourselves. I recently wrote a post for Psychology Today that some people have anger as a chronic identity, kind of reacting to other situations or other people, rather than dealing with the anxiety and the responsibility of, how do you create a life where you have suffered, where you have fears? What freedom and what ways can you take charge, rather than creating an entire identity based on hate?
Yeah, I imagine that's a Herculean job to do, but to go ahead and change up or to kind of change everything like that. I'm curious.
One of the best examples.
Sure, go ahead.
Of a movie years ago was American History, the one with Edward Norton.
Yeah, I remember that. American History or American History X.
X, right? That's right. Yeah, and he talks about growing up, saw hatred, developed bigotry, developed racism, and the movie evolves in recognizing how his own pain and hurt fueled that. Because if we haven't mourned and grieved with our own earlier wounds, and even later wounds, that leaves us more prone to anger and hate. But and the only way we can pass them is to go through them and mourn them and grieve them.
When do you think someone should see someone like you, because of what's going on, I guess, in their lives? What would indicate that they need some really psychological help with what's going on?
Friends are calling them hotheads. They're often been labeled hotheads. Maybe they're angry several days a week. Maybe perversive in terms of relationships, at work, on the road. So it's the frequency, duration, and the difficulty of letting go. If that's an issue too, then they could benefit by learning new strategies, more constructive strategies.
Okay. The other thing that I really wanted to address with you was being angry with yourself. Very often I'm my worst critic. I'm the one that really dislikes what I'm doing or what I'm doing, and I get very pissed at myself, angry with myself. Is that a different kind of a thing? What's going on kind of with when that's occurring?
In so many ways, it's the same thing. To give an example, my friends for years saying, you must work with some people who are yelling and screaming and throwing things. And, I said,
All the time.
I also work with people who are angry at themselves, highly self-critical, judgmental. And I encourage people I work with, and this is challenging, but to become aware of that tough love, critical voice, to be aware of it when it's happening, because it's been your companion perhaps for years for many people. It's meant to protect us from shame of feeling not perfect, from the shame of feeling like we're not doing something right. So that's one way, but it doesn't really do that effectively. And so when you become aware of that tough love voice, the challenge is to develop what can be considered a more self-compassionate or a compassionate self. So, if we make a mistake, you can yell and scream at yourself and say, I'm ignorant, boy, am I stupid. Or you did that, it happened, it's in the past, you can't go back. What did you learn from that for the future, though? What can be constructive in the next time you're in that situation?
Sure. Now, I'm
I'm
pissed off right now. I'm pissed off right now because about a half an hour before the show, I was cooking myself a hamburger on the grill, and I was not paying attention. And rather than me grab the handle for the grill, I grabbed the metal for the grill. Immediately slammed down about 500 degrees. And now I'm sitting doing my interview with you with my hand in a glass of ice water. And so I got pissed at myself and very, very angry at an inanimate object. I mean, you know what? Whose fault is that? What are you going to do about it? You know what I mean? It's a kind of like, all right, let's move on. There's not a lot, to me, there's not a lot you could do.
And in terms of developing a compassionate voice, asking yourself, what would you tell your best friend if they did that? If you wanted to be compassionate and finding words, that's the challenge. If we're used to a tough love voice, critical judgment, it takes practice to find the words that become more compassionate. And that doesn't mean letting yourself off the hook. Oh, I did that. I hurt someone. Oh, big deal. No, it really means from your most parental, compassionate voice, what could I do differently, more constructive the next time? Who's the person I want to become? And again, it takes practice. So I'll give an example. I know over my own history, if I'm in a foul mood, I might be more judgmental or critical of people I'm seeing on the street. So a couple of years ago, I was walking with my brother on a boardwalk by a beach where he lives in Florida. And I realized I began to say something. And one of the phrases I say to myself, besides constructive and destructive, at that moment I said, Bernie, is that necessary? From a compassionate tone versus something critical, judgmental, calling myself names. And like I say, that takes practice, and especially knowing that it's because I'm in a bad mood. If I'm in a good mood, everyone is wonderful. I can't understand why people aren't in a good mood if I'm in to some extent. But it involves that awareness to be able to choose how to respond to ourselves.
Yeah, well, my rationalization for the story I just told you is, well, look, Michael, even though you do this quite often and you're a pretty good chef and cook and stuff like that, if you're dealing with 500-degree furnaces, you ought to be careful about what you're grabbing. Just don't assume when you go put your hand up that you're grabbing the handle, because that might not be the case, even though you feel so comfortable doing all this.
And too many of us feel like we should be multitasking, when in fact there's no such thing as multitasking. You're concentrating on one thing at one moment, trying to, and then moving your attention to another very quickly.
Yeah, well, I take my cooking very seriously, so I got everything set up beforehand. The pickles are cut the right
Okay.
way, and I got my, so it's like this, and
Uh-huh.
kind of preparing for the show is the same way. I got to make sure I have my articles on one screen that I may want to look at, and
Uh-huh.
do my tests during the day with you, and all that. So I kind of become very meticulous. This was actually a lapse. I wasn't for a minute as meticulous. I was with some of it, but not with the dangerous stuff.
And the I think the constructive way of dealing with that too is reminding ourselves that we're human. I always present this perspective that we look at other animals and we say, kind of with a certain arrogance, but they can't feel. And yet we seem to spend a lot of time running away from our feelings and running away from being human, which involves making mistakes, having weaknesses, having flaws. And so reminding ourselves from that compassionate voice that we're human. We do burn ourselves with things while cooking.
Yeah, with crazy stuff sometimes it does happen. They say some things do hit the fan. Now, I would imagine one of the most typical, particularly here in South Florida. I'm glad you've been down here. I don't know if you've ever driven down here, but the state is supposedly has some of the worst drivers in the world. Seem to wind up all in Florida for some reason. In New York and in L.A. and California, you get some really intense drivers, but none of them seem to be as like bad. I mean, not looking, no direction. I mean, just like a complete disregard. And it happens to everyone at least once down here where they're riding and supposedly they're just minding their own business, riding on the highway, whatever. And some guy pulls up to them and he is so goddamn pissed at you for what you did. You may not even know what the heck you did. I mean, obviously, if it's you accidentally cut someone off when you wave at the guy and I'm sorry and all of that, but I'd say more than half the time there's like you don't know why this is going on. This happened to me once when I was very young, and it was so frightening. I actually drove off the highway. They followed me off the highway, and I looked up the nearest police station. I
Wow.
drove to the police station, and they didn't follow me into the parking lot of the police station. But
Mm.
since that's so common, I figured you must have some pointers and things you can tell the audience out here about how to handle situations like that.
One, in terms of getting riled up yourself or anyone who feels angry on the road, picture the other driver as a 5-year-old with the same adult head. And if you can get a little smirk out of that, what that does is change your whole physiological reaction, meaning
Hmm.
with with anger, your cortisol rate rises and you get ready for fight or flight. Having a smirk or a smile or even being able to laugh at the image very quickly cuts that reaction off. Another aspect of dealing with that is reflected by a client who attended one of my classes. For years, he became rageful at people who were racing down the road. And he said, until I had to drive my 16-year-old to an emergency room. After that, I just assume if someone is driving chaotically or racing, maybe they have a reason. On the other hand, if you're the target of anger, uh, both people who study anger, road rage, as well as the AAA recommend do not make eye contact. Just try your best to move away from them as possible, and try to wave down an officer or, with these days, using a cell phone if you're feeling threatened.
Yeah, it could be very, very frightening out here. People
Oh, very much.
try to run you off
Yeah,
the road. I mean, people can get really,
sure. And
really, really quite nuts.
when I see people who talk about becoming angry in return, I say, many years ago you could have done that, but you do that, you're risking your life.
Well, particularly here in Florida, I mean,
Sure, sure,
you don't really want to get into people's faces. I mean, this whole
right,
idea of get into your face and create an issue or create a problem doesn't play well with a lot of people down here.
right,
There are not many people here that have their doors open at night all night long with a big sign in the yard saying this is a gun-free zone.
right,
It doesn't happen. Their
right.
doors are shut, they're locked, and you don't want to bother with people. Um,
Yeah.
but I know that is something that people have to contend with quite often, and so you're saying pretty much if you can just ignore it and go on and go through it, and if and just watch yourself, I guess. Be the
Try to think out ways of your feeling safer.
So we've talked a lot so far about like different types of anger and things like that. I was wondering, is there a succinct set of pointers or things that you can tell people that you'd say, look, when you get angry, do this? Or has it become a very individual thing?
There are many different strategies in different situations. So, for example, I gave the example of being in a car. In general, one of the strategies is to first breathe deeply and exhale deeply 2 or 3 times. That's one strategy. Again, I say that's step one. It's a very popular strategy, but it's just one. One is focus your attention on your body very quickly. Breathing deeply and exhaling deeply gives you more oxygen, because when we're tense, we breathe shallow. We have more carbon dioxide in our body, and that has a physiological response of creating more muscle tension, which only escalates the anger. The other is to then turn inward and ask yourself, I'm angry. What feelings are behind my anger? And this takes practice. Again, anger is about feeling ignored, then I get angry. Shame, then I get angry. Feeling powerless or frustrated, then I get angry. So if you're really wanting to listen to the message, again, you're turning your attention inward. Asking yourself about your expectations, and this again requires taking time to reflect. I saw a man who said his wife was always 40 minutes late for every event, whether it's traveling out of state or to a wedding of a relative. And I asked how long that had happened. He said, well, I'm married 15 years. She's always been that way. So I suggested that that's an example of having a expectation that in many ways is more of a wish and a hope. And if you're rigidly holding on to that, you're only fueling your anger. Doesn't say you can't get her to change, but clearly you haven't found the right strategy. And you're holding on to that expectation too rigidly. And many times, the moment of anger, if we can get our body to relax, besides breathing, that takes rehearsal. So doing scanning our body, relaxing it, feeling muscles that are from your head to toe, doing a body scan, practicing it to relax each muscle group. Then when you're angry, you have rehearsed it, so you have body memory. That's why I say I don't like sound bites for dealing with anger, because it is complex. There's complexity of habits, thinking, feeling, and emotion, and it does involve rehearsing. One acronym I use that can be helpful is BEAR, B-E-A-R. B is to breathe deeply and exhale. E is to evoke physical calmness based on that practice I was referring to. A is arouse compassion to your own feelings. And that means, for example, saying to yourself when you're angry, I'm suffering right now. This is what suffering feels like. This is what anger feels like. This is what those other feelings, hurt, disappointment, feels like. So it's kind of being a witness to your own pain. And R is to reflect on what's the meaning of my anger right now. Our anger tells us more about ourselves than it does about the situation or person with whom we're angry, if we take time to pause and reflect on it.
Very, very interesting. Very interesting. Bear. I'm going to keep that in mind for myself, and hopefully I'll go ahead and I'll make some progress with myself in my life. I always feel that you're never too old to learn or to get better or to do things that are differently. Everyone has stress in their lives. There obviously is the need for anger, as we talked about constructive anger, but there's also like you said, you don't want to be damaging yourself, your body, or someone else, God forbid, in your angry state. Can you tell us a little bit about the book you wrote?
Sure. I had started writing a book for adults, several decades ago. I then decided to help children and teens first, so I wrote a book about 2003 on dealing with called Healthy Anger, helping children and teens manage their anger. So I finally finished the adult book called Overcoming Destructive Anger, Strategies That Work. And it's a mix of an anger log that I help people review a situation that has triggered their anger, to identify the feelings behind it, to identify what they were feeling in their body while they were angry, to identify the knee-jerk conclusion they made about the triggering event, their desire behind the anger. So it's reviewing the event. It includes mindfulness and mindful meditation strategies. And the example I gave earlier about being alert to your tough love, critical voice versus your compassionate voice, that's an example of being mindful. And there are practices that can help people step back and notice where your mind is taking you. That's part of mindfulness. And then similarly, compassion exercises that have been researched that are not just New Age exercises. They emphasize, if I say compassionate thoughts about you, for example, may you have good health, may you have peace, may you be safe. Through neuroimaging of the brain, they see certain area fires. If I say, may I have good health, may I have peace, may I be safe, that same area fires. And lo and behold, if I practice that, it helps reduce the level of cortisol, and it also increases the level of oxytocin, a hormone that is called a love hormone. When you feel warm and content holding the hand of your loved one, it helps calm you and create a sense of peace. So these exercises help do that. I should say a word of caution. Some people become extremely tense and very uncomfortable doing the compassion exercises, and so they need to do a more direct approach of dealing with past wounds and past hurts before practicing some of these. So it's those three areas that I focus on in my book: compassion skills, mindfulness skills, and keeping an anger log.
I have to tell you that a couple of the things you mentioned here, the techniques sound like NLP stuff. You familiar with NLP?
Yes, there certainly overlap, and some of the strategies derive from those originally.
Disassociative, looking at yourself from a different perspective, reframing. The guy who's driving the car should have a tiny little head, and then it kind of diffuses everything like that.
Right.
I remember once when my daughter was not feeling good, and we took her to a pediatrician, and there was blood work, and he was concerned with certain liver enzymes, and it scared the crap out of me. And I wanted to get home to take my daughter to the doctor. It was like the middle of the afternoon or whatever, and I was driving like a lunatic, just driving like an absolute lunatic on the road. I wanted to get home, and that was it. Lo and behold, there's a Broward Sheriff's Office, right? I'm going, pull me over, goes, hey man, what's going on with you? And I looked at the guy and I said, thank God you stopped me. His jaw dropped open and he looked at me like, I said, I guess people don't tell you that often. He goes, no. I said, my daughter's not feeling well and I wanted to get home. And I completely broke his pattern. Completely, right. He had no idea what to do, really, what to say, or how to handle any of it. And so he said, "I just drive carefully," and that was that. But so it is important, I guess, because the cops, when they stop you down here, basically they come off, they're pissed, they're angry, they're pissed. You're making them do their job, and they don't sometimes really want to do that, and so learning some of these techniques. Folks, again, where's the book available? Is it an Amazon book?
On Amazon, other book sites, yes.
Yeah.
And some bookstores that might exist.
Yeah, well, that might exist. It's very funny. I wish there still was. I really love Borders, but anyway, such is life. Such is the future of America. God help us all and bless us all. Look, I want to thank you for joining us this evening. I had a lot of fun speaking to you, and
Thank you.
And hopefully this will be of some use to a bunch of people. What happens quite often with the show is that I may get a whole bunch of listeners as it streams, but that's not where the real power comes in. The real power comes in when I go ahead and upload these things to all of the websites where they basically become chronicled, and people go ahead and they look at podcasts or video podcasts at their leisure. So these things can grow and grow. But again, I want to thank you for joining us here tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Like I said, it was fun. So I had a good time. I'm going to go ahead and sign off with you now. I'm going to be playing a video as I re-ice my cup for my fingers. And again, thanks so much for joining us this evening.
Okay, thanks. You take care.
I sure will.
Bye now.
I sure will. All right, take care. Folks, that was Dr. Bernard Golden. And again, his book is called Overcoming Destructive Anger. And you can get that on Amazon if you'd like. Anyway, this is Michael Blum, and I am going to be taking a quick break because I've been talking here over an hour or so, and it's time for me to re-ice.
Do you have a bad temper? When something upsets you, how do you handle it? Damn! Do you throw things? I don't know, punch walls? Ow. Or do you yell and scream? Say things that hurt people's feelings, and once you calm down, you regret. However your anger manifests, the reality is that your inability to handle situations calmly may be doing more damage than you realize. We all know somebody with a bad temper, right? How often do you hang out with them? Probably not that much. It only takes a few times of being around them before you're like, yo, you're a liability. What am I doing? Walking on eggshells. That's what you end up doing, trying not to upset them. Well, gentlemen, I don't want you to be that person. And so today we're going over 9 temper tips to help you manage your mood. Tip number 1, learn to identify what situations or circumstances end up setting you off. What makes you mad? Because until you identify what situations really just take you to level 12, you're never going to be able to control it. Once you identify the situations or circumstances that make you super pissed or upset or lose control, then you can try to not be or get yourself in those situations. Avoidance. But avoidance is only so good, because if it's like other dudes looking at your girl, right, it makes you crazy jealous and just infuriated with rage, well, you can't just not go out of the house. So you kind of need to move on to step number 2. Identify the anger or feeling as soon as it starts, because it doesn't normally, right? When we get upset, it builds, right? It's not something that just all of a sudden, bang, you're in this just crazy emotional It starts at like a 1 and gradually, now it can gradually increase fast and escalate quickly. But if you can identify that feeling, the feeling that you get when you start to get intensely angry or upset, then you can deal with it. If you can identify the feeling when it first starts, you can do things to help you not escalate. And really, it's this escalation that gets things just way out of hand and out of control. Remember, it's ultimately about control. You controlling your emotions, all right? You can't necessarily control how you react to certain things and the fact that things get you upset, but you can control the escalation of that anger. And tip number 3 is a way to manage that escalation, and that is practice relaxation techniques. Whether or not that's deep breathing or saying something to yourself like, it's okay, calm down, just think, hold on, allowing yourself a little bit of time before you just react. Because tip number 4 is think before you speak. And this is something that, oh God, is it hard, right? Because you think something, but it just wants to come out. But the issue is that once it's out there in space, you can't take it back. And words a lot of times can hurt people much more deeply and intensely than physical violence. Like saying something horrible to somebody a lot of times is worse than getting punched in the face. Tip number 5 is get physical exercise, all right? Because exercise and physical exertion is amazing in terms of stress reduction. A lot of times, if you find the stress building up and you don't have a release, well, this is a lot of times when you tend to explode emotionally. Tip number 6 is talk about issues as they arise. How many of you, show a hand, actually you don't have to show your hands because I know that it's probably a lot of you, because it happens to me. When something upsets me, I might not address it right then, but what I found is that if I don't address it and I just sort of store it, put it in my pocket, right? And it just like it's in there, and it starts gnawing at me. And then I look, and it's still there. All right, maybe something else happens, and I stick it on top of it. Bang! You explode because you just can't take it anymore. And people are like, "What is? I'm sorry, I didn't put the toilet paper roll back on." If you would simply have the conversation and address the issues as they arise, it never gets to that escalation point. Tip number 7 is, when at all possible, use humor to diffuse intense situations. But you need to be careful because sarcasm a lot of times, if you're in a heated, like about to get upset and people are upset, all right, and you start to throw in sarcasm, then people can take it personally. But humor is a great way to diffuse situations and bring it down an intensity notch. Tip number 8 is take a timeout. You know when you were little and you did something wrong or you were acting up and your mom or your teacher would be like, "You're in timeout, Alpha," and I'd be like, "Man," and you'd have to go and sit there, and then you're like, "Am I out?" And well, here's the thing. As adults, as grown-ass men, we can take time out. Timeouts from things that are bothering us. If there's a situation or a person that's upsetting us and that is causing us to get frustrated and angry, we need a lot of times to take a time out. Remove ourselves from that person, that situation, to give ourselves some breathing room. A lot of times what we're going to do is decompress. It's this decompression and the ability then to see things more clearly and to rationalize with these people. And tip number 9 is know when you need help and ask for it. There are groups, anger management classes, therapists. If you're having a tough time handling and managing your anger or your emotions, it might be time to go speak to somebody, a professional, because a lot of times we don't have the tools in order to help ourselves. And talking to the people or our wives or girlfriends or boyfriends, whatever, about issues, sometimes just doesn't work out, and you can't get the constructive criticism, feedback, or tools that you're going to need in order to manage your anger and emotions. Therapy is a good thing. It's a tool. Don't think of it as a negative. People that take control, realize they have an issue, and go out and seek help and actively fix themselves because they realize there's an issue, these are the people that are super solid and super strong. All right? There's nothing wrong. You should be not ashamed, have no fear of going and asking for help if you need it. Getting upset happens, but losing control doesn't have to. All right? Somebody makes you mad, I get it, right? It happens to all of us, but it's no excuse to hurt people physically or emotionally. And you don't deserve to be hurt either. So if you're currently in relationships or around people that have bad tempers who can't control it, well, it might be time to reevaluate that relationship as well.
And there you have it, folks. So, as I'm tempted to say at the end of every show, basically, don't get angry with people because, you know, everything in life is possible. Fewer things are probable, but one thing is certain, and that's that you're alive. So go ahead out. Don't be angry. Live life to its fullest because tomorrow is promised to nobody. We'll be speaking to you next time around on The Michael Blum Show. Have a wonderful week.